Okay, well, Sully's on the couch and he's ready to go, and you are ready to go, and Scout's down there on the floor, and she may jump up here any minute, just don't know. So we're going to get started. First of all, I had a question about, is that a toaster behind me? It's the toaster. It may have money in it that the cats have stashed. I don't know. If you had them in math class, you understand that. But sometimes Esther puts money into the toaster. And I don't use the toaster because I don't make toast, but somebody gave us a toaster and so we still have it. So I don't know. I don't look in that toaster. It may have cat money in it. Secondly, I was asked by a former student, pardon me, to talk about the situation that's going on right now with Ukraine and Russia that the United States is kind of involved in because of a situation that I'll tell you about in just a minute. So I spent the last couple of days researching that and deciding exactly how to talk to you about that. So I'm going to share my screen with my mad skills, and we're going to talk about Ukraine and Russia. Now, when I was a kid, we always called it the Ukraine, but that's not right. Apparently, we're just going to call it now Ukraine, which way makes better sense because, the Ukraine just sounds kind of weird. Okay, so first of all, let's look at where we're talking about. This is Europe over here, and this is Asia over here. And Ukraine is this one that's in yellow, sort of tan. I'm not sure what color that is, not green. And it's right in the middle between Europe and Russia. Russia is definitely Asia. Ukraine is kind of in between. And so that's part of the problem. Now, this town, Kiev, right here, is the capital of Ukraine, and it's also a very important town in Russian history. It tends to be seen spelled K-E-I-V when we spell it, but they spell it K-Y-I-V, but it's still Kiev. And it's a very, very important city. You can see Poland right here. This is Slovakia and the Czech Republic, which when I was a kid was Czechoslovakia. But after the Russian Empire, after the USSR collapsed, it fell and became two separate countries. Here's Hungary, here's Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria. And over here you have these little smaller countries, Belarus, Lithuania, Moldova, and then you have Russia. Now, when I was a kid growing up and studying geography, everything over here, Moldova, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, I think that's Estonia right there, but I'm not 100% sure. And it doesn't have a name on it, which is so totally unfair. All of this was part of Russia, and it was just called the USSR, the United Soviet Socialist Republic. And they had been their own little countries and then got kind of slurped up into the USSR or into the Russian Empire. And they were called satellite states or satellite countries. And when the Russian Empire collapsed, when the USSR collapsed, then they sort of went out on their own and became their own countries. And that's where the whole problem starts. So we have to go back to the beginning and see how this all started. In the 9th century, that would be the 800s, the Viking Oleg, the ruler of Novgorod, conquered the Rus people. The Rus, R-U-S people, are the people that were in that area of Russia. That's how it got its name. He founded the Kievan Rus, which is what is now the state of Ukraine. Kiev, or K-Y-I-V, and I spelled it the way we're used to seeing it, became the capital of the Kievan Rus. In the 10th century, Prince Vladimir the Great established, what's the matter with you? Cat's not happy. Established the Rurik dynasty. In 988, he became a Christian, an Orthodox Christian, and began converting all of the people in his country. So people in the Ukraine, in Ukraine, have been Christians for a long, long time. That's also going to be important. In the 11th century, the Kievan Rus reaches its peak under Yaroslav the Wise. He ruled from 1019 to 1054. Kiev became the Eastern Europe's leading political and cultural center. So this was a well-established city for a long time, since the 1000s, the 11th century. It's always the 1000s or the 11th century. You always add one more to get to the century. So we're in 2022, we're in the 21st century now, okay? Just in case you didn't know that and you're confused by why I'm talking about this stuff. Hey, Scout, how's it going? So 1237 to 1240, Mongols invade the Rus, ending Kiev's Rus's power. The Mongols were from what's now Mongolia, over close to China. They were a people who rode horses. They were sort of like what we tend to think of as our American Indians, the Plains Indians, who had movable homes and didn't build a lot of cities. They just lived on their horses and moved and hunted. That's kind of what these people were like. They were known as the Tartars, this group of Mongols, and they established the coolest name ever, the Empire of the Golden Horde. Doesn't that sound like something out of a video game? That just is cool. It probably wasn't nice to live in, but it's cool sounding. Poland, which is right over here, begins to annex western and northern Ukraine between 1349 and 1441. The Crimea, which is down here, this little peninsula, and is also very important, breaks free of the Golden Horde and conquers most of southern Ukraine. So they come up and they conquer this area here, maybe even over to here. From 1648 to 1657, the Cossacks were uprising against Poland and established what they called, and I'm not sure how to pronounce this, the Hetmanate. This is when they feel like Ukraine began establishing itself as an independent state. This is important also, because one of the things Russia is saying today in 2022 is Ukraine was never an independent state. It's always been a part of Russia. And you can see right here, beginning in 1600s, at least the Ukrainians thought that they were an independent state. 1686, the Treaty of Eternal Peace between Poland and Russia ends 37 years of war with the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is down here in Turkey. And the Poland and Russia partition the Hetmanate. That's a terrible name. That means they split it up between them. So this is Ukraine, and Poland took part of it, and Russia took part of it. They kind of carved it up between them. They don't care what the Ukrainian people think. They just do this, okay? And let me tell you, spoiler alert, Treaty of Eternal Peace, it didn't work out that way. Hello. 1764 to 1783. In 1764, Russia abolished the Hetmanate and established its government in Ukraine, a Russian government in Ukraine. From 1772 to 1795, Western Ukraine is absorbed into Russia, and then the 1783, Crimea and southern Ukraine are also absorbed into Russia. So down all the way down into here to get the Crimea. That's the Crimea right there. In the 19th century, which is the 1800s, the Ukraine people started to pull away from Russia, and there began to be an upwelling, a rise of Ukrainian literature. They focused on education. This ended when Russia banned the use of the Ukrainian language. It's like, hey, you people, you can't even speak Ukrainian. You speak Russian or you don't talk to anybody, because they didn't want Ukraine pulling away from them. All right, in 1918, the Tsar of Russia, who was the ruler of Russia, was overthrown. We know the story of Anastasia and how the Tsar and his family were killed, and the Communist Party took over. So in 1918, when that happened, Ukraine declared its independence from Russia. Said, y'all go do that. We're going to go over here. We're going to just be ourselves. This sparked a civil war in Ukraine amongst all of the different factions because you've got people that have moved in from Russia. You've got people that have moved in from Poland. You've still got leftovers of the Tartars and the Mongols in there. There's all these different people that live in this state. Think of our state. We've got lots of different groups of people that different ethnicities that live in our state. Well, in Ukraine, they all started fighting with each other. In 1921, the Russian army under Joseph Stalin, this is Joseph Stalin here, he's the one that ended up being in charge of the Russian Soviet Republic. They conquered 2/3 of Ukraine, so most of it. The western third became part of Poland. So here we go again. Poland and Russia have split up Ukraine and say, okay, there's no Ukraine anymore. There's Russia, there's Poland, and there's nobody in the middle there. Don't do that. Thank you. So the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic is established, and it's a state within the USSR. In the 1930s, Stalin's policies caused a man-made famine in the Ukraine. Dang, I've got to quit saying the Ukraine. But anyway, what happened is Stalin wanted to take control of everything that went on in the country. The communist way of doing things is the government owns everything. People don't own any land. People don't own any property. The government owns all of it, and they give some of it to the people to use and to give back to the state. So the government took over all of the farming communities and in a lot of cases killed a lot of the farmers. Not real bright. And then they took people from cities that needed a place to live, stuck them out on these farms, said, okay, y'all are in charge. Get to work, get to farming, grow food, country needs food. They had no idea what they were doing. And this did not go well. And so the crops failed because they didn't know how to plant them. They didn't know when to plant them. They didn't know how to water them. They didn't know how to take care of them. They didn't know any of this stuff. And so there was a famine caused by Stalin's policies and the fact that he didn't know what he was doing either when it came to farming. And so in the entire country, millions of people died of starvation, all because Stalin made some really bad decisions. In 1939, Western Ukraine is annexed by the Soviet Union under the Nazi-Soviet Pact. So remember, in 1939, Adolf Hitler is coming to power in Russia. The Nazis are coming into power. He doesn't want to get attacked by the Russians on the Eastern Front until he settles everything in Europe and gets the Western Front settled down. And then he's planning to turn and attack Russia. The Russians don't know that yet. And they fear, well, we'll just make our own deal with him and we'll just stay out of this altogether, because they didn't want to have a war because they had enough problems of their own right now. But part of the deal for that was that the Nazis said, well, okay, you can have Western Ukraine, and we're going to take Poland. You can have Western Ukraine. From 1941 to 1944, Ukraine is occupied by the Nazis because Hitler doesn't always keep his word, imagine. More than 5 million Ukrainians died fighting against the Nazis, and most of their 1.5 million Jews were killed. The Ukrainian Jews were killed. In 1944, after the war is over, Stalin deports, well, the war was over for them anyway. Stalin deported 200,000 Crimean Tatars to Siberia based on false accusations that they had been aiding the Nazi government. So he came in, and all of those people that had come in when the Mongols invaded back in, the 900s, he made them all move to Siberia, put them into prison camps, and made them live there. In 1949, the organization known as NATO is formed. And NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it's a military alliance that was formed in 1949 by 12 countries. They included the US, Canada, the United Kingdom, which is Great Britain, and France. And this is people that are in the Western part of the world, not the Soviet bloc, okay? Those members agreed to come to each other's aid in the event of an armed attack against any one of the member states. So if somebody attacks France, we as the United States are obligated to go and help because we have a treaty. If somebody attacks us, they're obligated to come and help us as well. They aimed to be an organization that was in place to counter any threat from the Russian expansion into Europe. Because one of the things that happened right after World War II was Russia started grabbing land. They grabbed part of Germany. They grabbed, they kind of got Poland. They got Romania. They got a bunch of those countries right there on the edge where they didn't actually annex them, but they kind of established power in that region, and those countries became communist for a long period of time. In 1955, Soviet Russia responded to NATO by creating its own military pact of the Eastern Communist countries, which they called the Warsaw Pact, which Warsaw was the capital of Poland, still is, I think. And so that's why it's called the Warsaw Pact. So you've got these two vying groups of countries, the NATO and the Warsaw Pact, that are fundamentally against each other. They're not at war, but they're just standing there saying, look, don't come over here, you know. In 1954, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev transfers control of the Crimean Peninsula to Ukraine. It had been part of Russia for a long period for some reason, and nobody really understood why. He gave it back to Ukraine. In 1986, a reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power station in Ukraine exploded. It sent a huge radioactive plume that traveled across Europe. The damaged reactor was eventually contained within a huge concrete cover, but doing that took, I want to say it was months to get it all handled, and hundreds of thousands of people were involved in this. Many of them died from being exposed to this, being this close to the reactor. They got sick from radiation poison and died. There's still huge areas around the Chernobyl plant that are just abandoned. It's still too radioactive to live there. It's still not a great situation. It won't be probably for hundreds more years. Let me start over. On November the 9th of 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. Now, the Berlin Wall divided the city of Berlin because part of the city of Berlin was controlled by the Americans and part of it was controlled by the Russians. Now, when World War II was over, Germany was split into 4 regions. There was a region for the Soviets, there was a region for the French, one for the English, and one for the US, because those were the four countries that had invaded, come into Russia and taken control of it. And they didn't let into Germany and taken control of it, because they weren't going to let the Germans be in charge of anything anymore, at least for a long time, until everything got back under control and they got rid of all of the Nazis. So one night, pretty much overnight, Russia built a wall that walled off their part of Berlin, and it was called the Berlin Wall, and it stood for many years. In 1989, that wall was taken down. I can remember it happening. You can look on YouTube and see videos of people just hammering it with, the Russians had agreed to let it come down, and the people on both sides just got out there and took that wall down. In 1990, this man here, Mikhail Gorbachev, became the last premier of the USSR. And on December 26th of 1991, the Soviet Union was dissolved. All of the little countries that were satellite countries were allowed to go back to being their own countries. And there was just economic problems and chaos. It just got really ugly over there for a while. I can remember seeing pictures of the soldiers in the Russian army were being paid in toilet paper because they could sell that, because the Russian government didn't have any money to pay them. So they were giving them toilet paper and vodka because they could sell that and make money to live on. It was crazy for a little while because they were going from one system where the government controlled everything and had for their entire lives. And even back before that, when the czars had been in charge, these people hadn't been free. They hadn't been a democratic nation like we are here. They didn't get to vote on things. Everything about their lives was controlled by the government. So they had no idea how to be a free democratic society. And it took them quite a while to learn. And I'm not sure they have all of them got it down yet. I'm pretty sure that in Russia, they've still got major problems. During the 1990s, about 250,000 Crimean Tatars, remember Stalin had sent them to Siberia. They all have returned now to the Crimea with their descendants because they sent men and women, so they got married and had kids. They all came back to Crimea following the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that's the people that are living in Crimea, or some of the people. In 1991, the Ukraine declared its independence formally and became its own state. In 1994, presidential elections were held. In 1996, they adopted a new democratic constitution and their own currency, their own money. In December of 2005, they'd been going along okay for a few years. This man, Viktor Yushchenko, became president. He favored joining NATO. And NATO has expanded over the years. It's more than 12 countries now. But it's not like NATO goes over and says, hey, you got to join us or nothing, you got to join it. People come and say, hey, we would really like to join NATO and get involved in having that protection. How about it? And NATO votes on it and decides, yeah, okay, we'll take you, or yeah, no, we're not, you can't come in. Relationships with Russia begin to go south at this point because Russia does not want Ukraine becoming closer to the West. They want Ukraine to stay more related to them. And if Ukraine joins NATO, Russia now has no control over them at all and no influence over them at all. In 2010, this man, Viktor Yanukovych, is elected president of Ukraine. He favors staying attached to Russia. And so in June, he cancels their application to join NATO because he doesn't want to be involved in NATO. He wants to stay involved with Russia. In 2012, Vladimir Putin, this man, becomes the president of Russia. Now, he, during the old Soviet Union, had been a KGB agent, and KGB was their secret police, and he really favors, he doesn't like just being Russia. He wants to go back to being the USSR. He wants all of those little countries back under the control of Russia, and I'm pretty sure he wants all of them under the control of him. So he is really not looking for Ukraine to move closer to the West at all. In 2014, in February, 77 protesters were killed in Kiev, and President Yanukovych flees to Russia. So they were protesting this moving back towards Russia. Most of the people in Ukraine did not want that. They wanted to move closer to the West. So they ran him out and he went into Russia. In March, Russian troops annexed the peninsula of the Crimea down there at the very bottom, remember? They invaded and they annexed it. And nobody did anything about it. In May, Petro Poroshenko, some of these names, wins the presidential election on a pro-Western platform in Ukraine. So he's still wanting to move towards NATO, move towards the West. So in July, pro-Russian forces shot down a Malaysian airplane that flew over their space and killed all 298 people on board. And that's the wreckage that you're seeing here. So in February of 2015, a ceasefire is brokered between the pro-Russian forces and the pro-Ukraine forces that were fighting it out, because the pro-Russian forces wanted all of Ukraine to go to Russia, and the pro-Ukrainian forces didn't want to go, and they wanted the Crimea back. So that's where we were there. Now we get to today. Russia is threatening Ukraine. Why? Russia wants NATO, the organization of NATO, to guarantee that it will never allow the Ukraine to join them, and it won't allow any of the other little countries that used to be in the Soviet Union join either. They've sent troops all along the border of Ukraine, up into here, into Belarus, all around here, and they have troops stationed on the border, and they're threatening to invade. Why is this important? If Russia can tell Ukraine, no, you can't join NATO, you have to stay with us, no matter what you want, even though supposedly you're a democratic country, you can't join Ukraine, you can't join NATO, then it can tell any of those other little countries. And at that point, what's to stop it from moving into Poland or Romania or Slovenia and Czech Republic and any of those other little countries that are right there on the edge just because it wants them? Right now, there are more troops gathered on the border of Ukraine than have been gathered anywhere since World War II. One of the things that we're a little bit concerned about is what's called a false flag operation, which means that President Putin might send Russian troops into Ukraine, not wearing Russian uniforms, to attack his forces, and make it look like, oh, wow, we're being attacked by the Ukrainians. We have to invade to protect ourselves. That's what's called a false flag. You fake something and make it look like you were attacked when you were the one that was doing it all along. So that's where we are, and why it's important is, do you stop this spread to people that don't want to be controlled by another group, or do you help them out? And so that's where we are right now, and we don't know what's going to happen. So let me know what you think. Let me know what you think. And I'll be honest with you, the US and Britain and France have got soldiers stationed on the other side, not in Ukraine, but standing there waiting in case they have to go in and try to push the Russians back out. So this is kind of a danger point. It could end up being a war. We don't know yet. The best thoughts are that if Putin does invade, it won't be till about the middle of February, because that's when the ground gets frozen enough that the tanks can roll in there. So we just have to wait and see what happens. Hopefully they work something out and things go back to the way that to normal and everybody gets left alone. We just don't know. That's all I have for you today. I don't have any answers because right now there aren't any. So think about it, talk to your parents, talk to your friends, see what you think. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. All right, Sully, we're done.